every young woman wants to be enthralled by romance. They picture themselves in 19th century England as Elizabeth Bennet as she slowly falls in love with the all-too-proud Mr. Fitzwilliam Darcy. These beloved characters belong to none other than Miss Jane Austen. Jane Austen was a female English novelist in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. She came from a humble beginning as she slowly made her way through the social norms and standards of a woman during that time. Jane's family consisted of her father George, who was a preacher, her mother Cassandra, her 6 brothers, and her sister Cassandra and herself. Jane was born on December 16, 1775. She acquired some of her education under Miss Anne Cawley. While she was under her, she and her sister both contracted typhus and were sent, and after their recovery came home and were self-educated through readings under their brothers and their father. She also gained much of her education through theatricals or plays that the children put on, which is how she obtained much of her work in comedy and satire. Jane began writing as early as 1787 at the age of 12. She wrote poems, short stories, and plays to entertain her family. She later compiled 29 of these into 3 notebooks, in which she entitled Juvenilia. As she moved into adulthood, she continued to live in her parents' household and do normal activities of a woman of her age and social standing, such as play the forte piano and help her mother and sister around the house. She began to write for profit in 1789, and by 1793 she was writing much longer and more in-depth novels, as well as beginning work on her 1793 play Sir Charles Grandison, which she later finished in 1800. By 1796, Jane had began work on her first large novel, Eleanor and Marianne, which later became known as Sense and Sensibility. At the age of 20, she met a young man named Tom Lefroy, who we know much of their relationship and the long hours they spent together through letters written to her sister Cassandra. The Lefroy family stepped in before anything major could happen and sent Tom away. After Tom's departure, Jane wrote a novel entitled First Impressions, which later became the well-known Pride and Prejudice. Also, in 1798, Jane wrote her novel Susan, which later became known as Northanger Abbey. Her father was so impressed that he sold Susan to a London editor, and where it sat until 1816 when it was repurchased by the Austen family. In 1800, Jane's father excited the whole family in an uproar as he announced his retirement from the ministry and moved the family to Bath. In 1802, Jane acquired her only known marriage engagement proposal. Initially she accepted, but by the following morning she had decided what a terrible idea it was and withdrew her acceptance. The family was once again shook up in January of 1805 as Mr. Austen was contracted an illness and passed away. In April 1809, Jane demanded that she get Susan back before their move to Chawton. However, the editor in London gave her an offer to buy it back. However, the Austens could not afford it at the time. In 1809, the move to Chawton was highly productive for Jane. While there, she wrote 4 novels. In 1811, Sense and Sensibility was published. And in 1813 came Pride and Prejudice at the beginning of the year and Mansfield Park later on in the year. In 1815, Jane learned that the Prince Regent was enthralled by her novels, and she was invited to his London house to dedicate her new book, Emma. In 1816, Jane finished her work on her novel Persuasion, and her brother Henry bought back the rights to Susan, However, the publishment of these two novels had to wait because Henry's bank failed, which put the entire Austen family in financial despair. In early 1816, Jane began to fall ill. However, it wasn't until midway through that year that the entire family noticed, and it began to be a problem. This began Jane's long deterioration. There are many theories about what illness it was. Those theories range from Addison's disease to an illness caused by drinking non-pasteurized milk to a reoccurrence of the typhus that was in her system since she was a girl. However, being the strong-willed woman that she was, she continued to work through her illness. However, by 1817, she was bedridden and could no longer work. Later in that year, her brother Henry and her sister Cassandra took her to Winchester to receive medical attention. However, before the medical staff could heal Miss Austen, she died on July 18, 1817, in Winchester, where she is buried in the Winchester Cathedral. After her death in 1817, Cassandra and Henry arranged for Persuasion in Northanger Abbey to be published as a 2-book set. Also, in 1832, her copyrights were purchased by a London publisher named Bentley. He published her works in 5 illustrated volumes, and also was the publisher of the first collected works of Jane Austen in 1833. Jane Austen was an 18th and 19th century authoress. Her works have become some of the most time-honored and well-read romance novels of all time. Women throughout the ages have been enthralled by her characters, such as the strong-headed Elizabeth Bennet and the timid Fanny Price. Jane's books continue to be read and published today, and as Jane says, it is a great deal in order to read a book. The end.